Thank you and good morning, everybody. It's really heartening to see how full the room was. I had this dread that on day 3, there'll only be 10% of the people still here. Obviously, this topic is so relevant. It's drawn you all here, and I'm very glad to see you. It's difficult to follow those really excellent talks and keynotes that we've already seen. I just want to make a few comments about the evolution of AI and generative AI. I've been working in this field for a while, and I'm sorry to say that I was not one of those that would have predicted where we are today. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, when will we have an AI that can write code? I said, I don't know, probably not in my lifetime. And today, every engineer in my team is using this tool. Just a little reminder how far we've come. Does anyone recognize this? This is something called StyleGAN. GAN stands for Generative Adversarial Networks. Those are the types of AI. They basically fight against each other to improve themselves. That's how you got AlphaGo, an artificial intelligence that can beat world masters in the game of Go. In this case, the goal was, can you create a photorealistic human face? And the answer was convincingly yes. And it's gotten only better. But that was only the beginning. After StyleGAN, we had Stable Diffusion, where a person can sit down and with a textual prompt generate images that some are better than others. I have to say, especially that one in the lower corner. I thought, yeah, Pope Francis, he's a cool guy. I bet he does wear a leather jacket. No, generated by Stable Diffusion. And then if you've been watching, I'm sure you've all seen this probably in the past week, the Google Veo demonstration, video generation. I didn't bother to embed them here, but I strongly suggest you have a look at them. Again, astonishing. 5 years ago, I would never have predicted that we would have this kind of capability. And of course, together with this kind of capability, the ability to produce disinformation has been what I would call democratized. You no longer need a state actor to produce a carefully choreographed fake propaganda film. A high school student can do this just as well. And this, I think, is quite alarming. In case you're wondering why I'm standing up here, AIT has been involved in disinformation research since at least 2019. We started with a study for the Federal Chancery, and since then we've been involved in numerous national and international projects. I'd like to call out our funding agencies, the FFG and the Kiras Civil Security Program here, as well as the EU programs of Horizon Europe that have brought us to this point. So we have several projects ongoing right now. And with that short introduction, I'd like to now begin to introduce my panel, fantastic panel. And we're covering very diverse topics. So starting with Katharina Schell as Katja, she was already introduced, deputy editor-in-chief at the Austrian Press Agency. And she represents the media and journalism corner of this problem. Next, I'd like to invite Friedrich Moser, documentary film producer and director who's been writing, directing, and shooting, producing award-winning documentaries since 1999. His films have been exhibited across the world, been on Netflix, Amazon Prime, iTunes, and so on. Please come to the stage, Fritz. Interestingly, though, being a filmmaker is just one of the hats that he wears, and he'll be talking about a couple of others today. And he represents, I would say, the awareness-building aspect that we need to build up to become resilient against disinformation. The next speaker is Robert Moro, who attained his PhD in intelligence software systems from the Slovak University of Technology in Bratislava. He's presently working as a researcher at the Kempelen Institute of Intelligent Technologies in Bratislava and is involved in several ongoing Horizon Europe projects, in particular the Vigilant project, one of the flagship disinformation detection projects, which he'll be talking about today. Then we have Georgios Kolorakis. He's already been on the stage once, has many hats, an expert in issues with the intersection of technology and security policy with more than 20 years of experience. And finally, Julia Haas, sorry. She has a master's degree in law from the University of Vienna, a Master of Laws or LLM in Information and Media Law, PhD candidate, advisor to the OSCE representative on freedom in the media, A very impressive CV in any case. So, thank you all for joining on the stage. I'm now going to invite our speakers to give position statements. We'll start with Fritz Moser.
Yeah, thank you for the nice introduction. I think the best way to introduce myself is actually to run the trailer of my film, How to Build a Truth Engine. If you could do that, thank you.
There's ground warfare, sea warfare, air warfare, but the most devastating of all is the information warfare.
It's a really critical time for the world where the truth is under attack as never before.
This is our house! The revolution is here!
Stand up, kill for your country. Take to the streets in your tens of millions.
How have we come to a point in which we can believe such totally different versions of reality?
I can't believe this is reality!
There is some vulnerability in the human brain.
We see patterns in places that they don't even exist.
How can you tell truth from falsehood?
The brain is what constructs a reality that we then try to understand.
What we have is a huge publishing machine, and it happens at the speed of nanoseconds.
How can a peaceful society turn into one in which horrible, large-scale atrocities happen?
Storytelling is incredibly powerful. It's one of the ways we construct in-groups and out-groups. And once you've constructed another group as an out-group, it's incredibly easy to dehumanize them. And once you've dehumanized a group, they're no longer humans, so you can kill them.
What we investigate often is the deepest levels of evil.
People that are trafficked, people that are enslaved, narco-trafficking, terrorism, and money laundering on an industrial scale.
I asked him, how do you verify this? And he showed me a satellite image, and I just thought, oh God, this is next level journalism.
So I'm a documentary filmmaker, but by training, I'm actually a historian. So I've got a degree in contemporary history and German studies from the University of Salzburg. And my master thesis was about populism applied to a historical figure. I thought I would take basically the definition of populism and then go into the archives and dig for material. It came totally different because there was no definition of populism. So I had to come up with something, and this led me to study the mechanics of the populist discourse. And this is something that I did in the mid-90s, and somehow this film closes on this door that I opened back then with the mechanics of what's going on in our brain. Why do we fall so easily for disinformation, fake news, and conspiracy theories? I'm here as a documentary filmmaker, but not only. Because one of the outcomes of showing this film and getting this film out into Austrian cinemas, which was like the first release that we did, starting in December last year, internationally it's going to follow this fall, was how can we actually have an impact that goes beyond what we are showing in the film, because those who were present yesterday probably left the room a little bit depressed. And one of the things was I teamed up with a bunch of people, and we created, or are in the process of creating, a non-profit which is called Open Circle Lab, where we are building social media literacy workshops and materials for schools. Because I do believe that there is a way to overcome all this digital dystopia, which is personal relationships in the real world. And this is something that we have started, and our first initiative is called Influencers at School, where we get together influencers with educators to run these workshops. And the workshops will not be telling people about what social media does or how harmful it is, but going through experiences that show in a very physical, hands-on, immersive approach how these algorithms work. So that's the first thing. The second thing that came out of my film is, in the film I was covering several stories. In the film I was covering several storylines. One was a journalistic storyline, focusing mostly on the New York Times visual investigations team, who just won another Pulitzer. The other one was the development of a software that automatically would detect conspiracy theories in unstructured text through narrative extraction. That's something that came out of the labs of Professor Vani Rajaduri of UCLA, Department of Electrical Engineering, and Tim Tangalini, who actually is a computational folklorist at the Department of Scandinavian Studies at UC Berkeley. One of the outcomes was that Professor Rajaduri wanted to do a spin-off of this project that he had run in the lab, and he invited me to be part of this. So I became a co-founder of an AI company based in California, which is kind of weird given my background, but I hugely enjoy it because it presents me with questions that otherwise I would not be presented with. And one of the first products that we have in development is a generative AI that does not hallucinate. And I know this is a big announcement because that's one of the biggest challenges, actually, the hallucination. But not only does it not hallucinate, it's also traceable. So it's more than even white box AI. It's a transparent AI where you can see where does it get the information from, down to individual sentences and statements on social media, for example. So that's a little introduction to myself. As a filmmaker, I'm always interested in topics at the intersection of technology with politics, with society, and of course, a lot of heavy scientific stuff, as those who were present yesterday may have noted. So if you have interesting stuff that you are doing research on, pitch me, please, I'm here.
Thank you very much. So our next panelist, Robert Moro, represents the research aspect of disinformation.
Thank you. I should have some slides prepared. Yeah, there they are. Okay, great. Hello everyone once again. I would like to talk about part of disinformation phenomenon, which is disinformation which is related to crimes or some illegal activities, and how we try to approach that. I guess everyone here in the room is familiar with the definition of disinformation, and even though disinformation can cause public harms, can incite violence, influence elections and our institution and so on, it is very hard to investigate, and even if it's somehow related to crimes, it's very hard to prosecute those who create or disseminate disinformation. And this is like two main reasons. One of those is that legally much of what's connected to disinformation is not considered illegal in Europe, of course for very good reasons, because it's protected by freedom of speech. But even if the disinformation, so maybe the question then is like, okay, so if this is true, is there still some disinformation which is, for example, interesting for law enforcement agencies that could be and should be investigated? And there are some examples. And for example, during COVID, there has been disinformation used to promote and sell fake cures. And this has been investigated, for example, in the UK, maybe also in other countries. And people were prosecuted, charged, and then sentenced for this. Also, disinformation can lead to real-world violence. This is a case from 2023 in Dublin, when there was a real event, stabbing of children. And then the rumors and disinformation started to spread on social media, on instant messaging apps, claiming that this was a deed of an illegal immigrant, and now connecting several unrelated events, such as a murder of a teacher, which was done coincidentally by by a Slovak immigrant, but all these people were there legally, but still it led to huge eruption of violence that caused a lot of damages, and this is something for which these are the events for which the police would like to be prepared and maybe to know in advance that something like this is going to happen. So that leads me to the second problem. So even if there are some disinformation which is relevant and of interest to law enforcement agencies, it's still very, very hard for police officers to investigate these things because they are not equipped with relevant tools. And we've heard also in Katarina's talk that since 2016 there has been a lot of research on this information. A lot of tools have been developed, many of them, for example, for fact-checkers, media professionals, but there has been somehow disconnect from law enforcement agencies, and that's why European Union tried to somehow bring these technologies to these agencies, and that's one of the goals of the Vigilant project that I'm working on and I'm here kind of representing. So it's, as you can see, the consortium behind the project is really spread out throughout the Europe. It consists of many institutions, and importantly, we also have the stakeholders in terms of police authorities from 4 different countries, and there is also a community of early adopters which brings together relevant agencies from other countries as well. And what's maybe interesting is not only the technological part, so trying to do this platform, but also provide some trainings, provide this network to share experience between different agencies, because this information is also multinational, and it's especially true also in European Union. And maybe just to quickly show you, because the project is now in its last year, so we already have many results, and there is also a prototype of the platform. So it can already ingest data from several live sources, such as news, blogs, also from public groups or channels from some social media, because that's still a challenge how to get the data. And it allows police officers to do multimodal search, so search in text, but also images, something like you would do in Google Images. And most importantly, there is this disinformation toolbox, which brings some of those technologies that have been developed and researched in past years, such as detection of events, detection of hate speech, maybe detection of violence, also in terms of images, being able to detect objects such as weapons in photographs or different symbols related to extremism. And it also contains tools to analyze coordinated behaviors on networks. And the application area is potentially not only disinformation, but also extremism, maybe even terrorism. It should help the police officers to investigate foreign information manipulation as well, or investigate criminal networks which often use social media to either recruit new members or raise finances. So if you are interested, you can become part of that community of early adopters that I've mentioned previously. You just need to, well, you can talk to me after this or use one of these contacts. And yeah, I'm happy to discuss all the challenges that still lie ahead of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Now we have Georgios Kolirakis. He will be representing, I think, on one side the policy aspect, but in particular policy with regard to data, an essential aspect in the disinformation detection and production ecosystem.
Thank you very much. This is a mission impossible to speak about societal impact, and particularly how you measure that. And I will be speaking with my hat of advising that EU pilot project, which is a sort of sister project that the one that Robert presented. And I have to say, thinking about how we should narrow down the problem, around 10 years ago, we started to build up units and division, strategic communications in governmental settings, in ministries of foreign affairs, also at EU level. Back then, we didn't know much how to go about. This is the interconnection map of risks from the annual global risk report that the World Economic Forum publishes. And those cyber-related risks are on the upper right corner. The interesting thing here is that they are in interconnection with other issues of non-technological nature, such as societal polarization, interstate armed conflict, interstate violence, and so on. I would dare say that the diagnosis has not significantly changed since 2015. What has changed is the magnitude of harm and the speed of dispersion. Now, reflecting upon Philip's keynote and also Katarina's keynote, we are definitely experiencing a quantitative change. I do not know whether we are standing before a tipping point which will affect a qualitative change. However, we are taking action. This is the policy framework which is being discussed since last year. It is called the European Democracy Shield, which is scheduled to be presented in the autumn 2025. And there should be an overarching, let's say, policy of how to make the liberal democratic settings like ours resilient. It is based upon that notion of information integrity, which has been established in the context of the United Nations and of the OECD. However, I wish to touch upon a very specific aspect which has to do with law enforcement, because someone has to do the job when something happens. And this is exactly the pilot project that has been put in place to examine how we can reduce the risk out of fake news in the transfer from the virtual world to the material world, from the online to the offline world. This is a very, very simple and very, very ambitious, very difficult. So a major question, I will not present the project, but one of the major questions that is of major policy importance is how to measure the passage from the online crime to the offline world crime. We would need to have a sort of evidence basis in order to take action. What does it mean, action in law enforcement, prevention and mitigation? And the project has used two sources of evidence. First of all, indicators, those behavioral indicators, digital literacy. I think you have pointed to that. This is a very important indicator, and there are statistics at the OECD level, and also trust in public institutions. One could speak also of trust in private institutions. And on the other hand, the project had to collect good old crime statistics from law enforcement agencies, disaggregated along motivation. Has that been a terrorist act, left-wing motivated, right-wing motivated? Has it been religious motivated, and so on? In that consortium, law enforcement agencies from 6 countries have been very, very active, and those countries have been Germany, Spain, Finland, Sweden, Belgium, and France. Now, the pretty disappointing result has been that only the data collected and disaggregated by the German federal police had that granularity to allow statistical, socioeconomic analysis in order to find which is the cost, the societal cost of that sort of online disinformation and misinformation activities. Partially those of Spain as well. What happened with the rest of the countries? It has not been a major problem that we didn't have access. These are confidential data, of course. One does not have, there's not a public access to that. However, the national law enforcement agencies were willing to share them in the consortium. However, we realized that first, either they do not collect that sort of data, or they do not disaggregate them in a way to allow a meaningful analysis so that we come up with a robust, evidence-informed recommendation of do it like that or do it like that. And to give an example, France, which is a huge country, also sadly with a track record in terrorism, the data repositories are a soup, if you allow me to say that. They do not disaggregate the motivation behind those sorts of crime. And this is the reality that we have to start working with. We have a very complex problem in front of us, and we need to break it down to bits and pieces in order to take policy action. And this is the first step that we should need to consider, to do our homework at national level so that we be able to deliver some meaningful and effective policies. The European Commission has established 2003, and the final report has been out in November 2024, the high-level group on access to data for effective law enforcement and forensics. There is a report with specific recommendations. And I wish to end with a matrix, which is the digital, it is a digital dashboard. It has been, such annual dashboards exist since 2022. It is a series of composite indicators drafted by the Joint Research Center. And I would dare ask, who in the room is aware of those resilience dashboards? Because there are 5. There is one geopolitical one, one environmental one, one digital one. I do not see many hands up. I want to say this is an evidence-informed tool. However, national ministries need to feed such models with data. So first, they need to start collecting them. And these are not, we do not need elaborate technology tools for that. We need just to do our good old homework of collecting those statistics that would be meaningful in order to lead for us to be able to draft evidence-informed policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gorgios. Our last panel member, Julia Haas. I'd say she represents the global, the big picture from the policy and societal impact view.
Yes, good morning. Thank you. I will indeed try to connect a bit the dots of what we heard so far. And also as the last statement, I have the moral obligation, I think, to end a bit on a positive note, because we heard questions on whether independent journalism still exists in 10 years, whether we are at a tipping point, but at the same time, I think we already heard very promising examples of how indeed we can better build resilience. So I will today frame my conversation around how can we get from the information disorder that is so prominently spoken about these days to a healthy online information ecosystem. We heard, I think, specifically this morning, but also in the last days already a lot about disinformation, hybrid warfare, about hybrid threats, all these key terms or keywords. And it became very clear, I think, also in all of your daily information consumption. Just to give you one example that maybe you were also following, is that a few days ago we had there were presidential elections in Poland, which were very much 50-50 in the end, how they went out. And you could see that in the discussions, there was a lot of conversation about whether, and if so, how disinformation or also maybe foreign interference played a role. You could see the same in Romania only a week ago. a week before. So you can really see that this conversation is taking on a very prominent role in all policy discussions in everyday lives of people. Last year was framed as election super year in 2024, where almost half of the people went to the polls or had the opportunity to go to the polls, and disinformation was one of the key themes that was discussed in all of that. But today we are actually speaking about information integrity rather than only disinformation as one aspect of it, which I think is very important because it underlines that we are actually speaking also about the structure and the systemic context and not only disinformation as an individual piece of false information, as we have also heard in the keynote. So what are we talking about? I already mentioned elections, crisis, where of course disinformation has a huge impact. In the presentation just before, we have heard about how difficult it is to actually measure it, but of course disinformation has been proven to have impacts on trust in institutional integrity. It has also been used, for example, as an attempt to justify aggression of war even. So there is a clear societal impact that is very relevant to consider, and it is also very clear that it is linked to geopolitics and to really the conversation about how states interact, how states intervene, and how states see the challenges and try to control information for that manner. The keynote that we heard earlier this morning had this phenomenal name or title of "Fake is over, but so is real." And I think, or this is what I wanted to pick up to start with a quote that is very often attributed to Kafka, because I think the world we live in right now has a lot of this Kafkaesque elements. And the quote is very nice in German because it reads, "Die Lüge hat sich wahrgelogen," which translates to the lie lied itself true, or kind of it has transformed to truth. So it's really about the question whether we live in a world where we still can distinguish between truth and lie. And this, as mentioned, is attributed to Kafka, but in fact, if you look back, many of the people who researched his work said that it is actually not from him, which kind of fits very well, I think, the conversation we're having today. So, but in any case, it has become clear that truth is becoming kind of increasingly optional or rare. And for this, I think it is really important to look at the information ecosystem more broadly. So not only to look at disinformation as this individual pieces of content, but to really look at how is disinformation and actually information more broadly accessed. How is it produced? How is it spread? And what is the context of information ecosystem, so to speak. And there we also already heard this morning that, of course, the advent of more AI and technology has impacted a lot the scale and the scope of disinformation and information that is misleading. But the main challenge, I think, in this, and that is something that maybe connects a bit the dots between all the different conversations we are having or have been having for the last couple of days, is that, in fact, the main challenge of disinformation is not that people might be believing an individual piece that is not truth, but rather to not believe anything anymore. And there's a very beautiful quote by Hannah Arendt, the great philosopher from the 1930s when she was studying totalitarianism, to say that really the key problem or challenge is if people don't believe anything anymore, they cannot distinguish between right and wrong, and that also means that they can be very, very easily manipulated. So it becomes clear if we look at the 1930s that disinformation is, of course, not a new phenomena, but it is really about scale and scope. So let's look at what is the role of technology and AI in this conversation, because this is, of course, the focus of today. So information today is accessed mainly in the digital sphere. It is accessed online through social media, digital platforms, search engines, all of that. For a very long time, the role of technology in that conversation has been focusing on how automation and AI is used in content moderation and content curation. So the question of what pieces of content are being surfaced, why, for what reasons, how is relevance being defined, and by whom it is defined. There's a lot of work going on in this area that I'm happy to also share later on how the information ecosystem is really captured to a certain degree by a few key actors who define, by using technology and automation and AI, on how information is being surfaced, what is taken down, and what is not. which for those of you who joined the movie screening yesterday, there was a lot of conversation also on echo chambers and filter bubbles and what implication this might have on society's ability to inform themselves. Then, of course, we had the rise of generative AI. Already in the early days of development of chatbots with Tay, there was the phenomenon that when you replicate human speech very early on, also these automated tools were spreading false information, were spreading offensive information. And now we are in this situation where with generative AI, we have heard about generative search, we have heard about hallucinations, we have heard about how really we have this hyper-personalization, hyper-targeting of information pieces that are not really fact-based, that are not living up to the same ethical principles as journalism, for example, but are really used for individuals to receive information that is relevant for them. Now we are slowly starting conversations on the next step, like agentic AI, where it's not yet clear how it will impact the space of disinformation, which is the same as with quantum, which was a bit the conversation on the first day. But it's really several steps in evolution, as also we have heard in the very beginning, of how technology is impacting and enabling an amplification of disinformation. In any case, it is clear that these technologies, also the generative AI that we are speaking about mostly now, is not organized and designed in a way that is democratic in the sense of like sharing or creating a space for common exchange, for a shared reality because of this hyper-personalization and really creating audiences for one. But at the same time, and now I think you already noticed that I like quotes, here's my next quote of one of phenomenal people who is Maria Ressa, who won the Nobel Peace Prize 2 years ago, who said that without facts, you cannot have truth. Without truth, you cannot have trust. And then you cannot have a shared reality. And shared reality is really kind of the starting point of democracy, of a community, of working together. So I already spoke briefly about the information ecosystem and how it works and how this logic works. So what is really surfaced today is what is being defined as being relevant by those big corporations, by social media search engines that capture the information space, which can then again be misused by states, by malicious actors, to make sure that the piece of information or content, the misleading information they want to bring out, can exploit these logics to really reach huge audiences and to become viral and to take over the information space. So this is why, for me, it is really important to not only speak about the integrity of information, but also to speak about the integrity of our information space. So then moving to how can we address these challenges, which is, of course, the most important point. And one of the crucial aspects and the challenges we also heard already before is that we have to do so without restricting freedom of expression and to rather turn it around to say, how can we overcome the censorship narrative, to turn it around to say, how can we ensure access to reliable information rather than focusing only on the negative side and on the questions of how to fight disinformation. Here, it is crucial to move from reactive responses like fact-checking, as we heard before, as literacy, which are, of course, all essential elements, but are only reactive to ask people to critically assess information, all of that, to rather build a focus on resilience and proactive action. There are many keywords that I just want to quickly run through it, that for building resilience, you need a holistic approach, you need multi-stakeholder approach, you need international cooperation, as we heard in the opening speech this morning, but you also need really an investment in trust, in transparency, in democracy for that matter, and not an investment in information control. And then there is, of course, the key role of public interest journalism, which links back to the keynote and to the opening of this very session. So it is clear that there is a need for upstream solutions, not only kind of trying to fix problems or kind of patch up a system that is not working, but to recognize how can we from really upstream, fix solutions that our information ecosystem cannot be misused for disinformation, but that in contrast, we have an ecosystem that is focusing on public interest information. So there is a need for regulation without repression that is human rights centric and that builds on media freedom and the public interest. The key safeguard in that regard would be really to focus on the structure and the structural systemic implications rather than to focus on disinformation as pieces of content, because we know the regulation very often has huge risks of overreach and misuse from the state side. So just very, very quickly to end on a call to action, to really say, building on this understanding of that there can be no peace, democracy, and security without media freedom, that we have to move around the discussion on how can we build together an ecosystem that is a healthy online information space, that is not captured neither by a few big tech actors nor by states, but that in contrast is really rooted in pluralism, in media freedom, and in a public interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you to all the panel members. I think what we've seen is how broad the topic is. We've tried to cover a very complex and broad topic in a short time. At this point, I would like to open the questions, whether there are questions from the audience.
Thank you, Mr. Moser. Thank you to meet you, and thank you for the great film. I'm a really big fan from you. I'm a fan of your old film, A Good American. It shows us really the truth. And maybe sometimes when I showed this film to others, they say this film is fake. And I said, no, you do not make fake films. So at all, thank you for your way to convince people to show that we could also switch off the devices and talk each other, and also to have a discussion about things. And I think through the discussions, we can find new solutions. But we have to respect that most of the channels are influenced from this A Good American thing you told, that they are building and influencing all of these channels, and we are really, really influenced by that. So shouldn't we speak also about these digital channels which transport maybe the truth or not, and what we can do in Europe to change this situation?
Well, thank you. And A Good American was a film I made 10 years ago about basically the prequel to the Ed Snowden story. I think what we need in terms of European policies is we need European platforms. We need European infrastructure. We need European tech. We need to have a technological sovereignty. We need to have also a technological autonomy. I think this is needed. I know that, and I really love the speech of Professor, I forgot the name, at the beginning, that we need international collaboration, but I think this needs to come from a basis of strength. And this is the first thing. The second thing that I want to mention is there is a study. I have not a slide, just a second. Which was published by The Guardian on the 20th of May. And the headline reads, almost half of young people in the UK would prefer a world without internet. Half of the 16 to 21-year-olds support digital curfew, and nearly 70% feel worse after using social media. So one of the things that we are also supporting in these social media literacy workshops and initiative that we are doing is there's one which is called Unplug and Play. Yeah? And I think the experience of being physically in a room with people is a very different experience from just being online connected with somebody. And I think we need to de-digitalize in some ways and go back to some more analog experiences, actually, because at the end of the day, it's about emotions more than just thoughts. I think it's more the emotional side that is more important in the way how we how we establish relationships, because it's about establishing relationships, and those experiences, I think, those emotional experiences are the one that will safeguard us and help us build resilience. In terms of technology, and something that I also wanted to add to the necessity for a shared reality, this does not only apply to democracy. We also cannot have a market economy if you don't have a shared reality. You cannot trade goods and services if you don't know whether they're true or not, whether they're real or not. So one of the initiatives that I try to do as a spin-off of this film is to try to bring business onto this. We need the support of businesses. And I think, and I've already had a great experience with the WKO, which is the Austrian Chamber of Commerce. They are really supportive of this because they see the problems for having a fair competition, for having a choice, and for having the blessings of a market economy, which is also having good products. You cannot have this with monopolies. So we need to fight monopolies. We need to have open markets, regulated markets, but open markets, a fair competition. I think that's something we need to work on. And the entire debate that we have about democracy needs to be added with market economy.
Thank you, Friedrich. I think we have, I agree, it deserves some applause. But I think we have other comments from the panel. Gorgios.
I wish to point to the fact that yesterday there has been a dedicated session on transnational infrastructure. And one of the conclusions was that for strategic reasons, we need to reduce critical dependencies upon private operators outside Europe. I think the chair of the session is here, Eric, and this is a crucial issue. We have to start also with the materiality of the intangible out there. These are very specific policy recommendations. In order, again, in terms of policy, to break down the problem in manageable pieces. So yes, there is a convergence also of what other sessions have been discussing in the context of IDSF.
Can I also add something? Thanks a lot. I just wanted to add one point, because this is in fact something that also we at the OSCE fully agree with, that there is a need to build alternative and public interest infrastructure. I just wanted to build on this last point, because I think it's important to say, yes, we do need autonomy and alternatives, and maybe also European alternatives based on European values, whatever that is, but like based on international human rights standards, let's put it that way. But I think it's really important to then also point to the fact that it's relevant to build that in a smart way that can then not be co-opted again. Because what we don't need is 5 alternative Facebooks with the same logic of boosting disinformation over accuracy, right? We need alternative structures that are centered on the public interest and that are decentralized, that can then not be misused by other actors, be it now private or being states. So I think it has to be really conceptualized in a way that makes clear that while we need to fight monopolies and take away this concentration of power, it should not inadvertently lead to more state control over these spaces, just because we rightly want to fight the captured approach from big tech.
Any other comments? Do we have time for one more question? Oh, I see a couple out there. I don't know who was first.
Hello, my name is Manfred Pinneger. I have a question to the lady of the OSCE. I've been through my 30 years career in the Ministry of Interior in Austria, several times abroad. And whether it was the United Nations mission, whether it was some investigations we carried out abroad, or whether it was recently in Ukraine for the External Action Service, as far as I know, all these international stakeholders use Microsoft. They all use Google. And even though there is open source everywhere, you have a lot of open source, you have Linux-based systems, my company runs on Linux. Why is that? And to my opinion, it is because there is a market. And as long, and the AIT, as far as I know, is a big player trying always to convince we have technological alternatives. But as far as I know, my friends in the OSCE, they use Microsoft software system, don't they? So my question is, what is and Europol the same, by the way. I've been working several years at Europol. And what do they use? Microsoft systems. So I mean, this is hypocrite, isn't it? Claiming that we should do all of that, and then those institutes, by the way, the EU does it as the very same. So I think that would be an agenda to come up, to do budget, and to really go for open source, and to really do also the intelligence system, the national intelligence bodies, to come up with these solutions, because we have that solutions at hand, but nobody goes for that. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I mean, just very briefly, of course, this is a super valid point. I mean, I've also worked in a ministry before, so I know, as you do, it's not the most agile organizations, but it is very true to make this point, and it is something that I think is slowly moving. Like, for example, in the conversation about environment, you see that now, like, this event is certified as a green event, right? So there's more understanding that we have to live what we preach, and there are some initiatives to at least not use one system only. So, for example, we don't use Microsoft Teams, we use Skype, whether it's better or not, I don't know. But at least there are some alternatives, but there is at least an initiative from some of the actors within these spaces to use open source tools, to use servers that are not based in the US. So I think especially in this data protection area, there's more movement of understanding. So it is slowly moving, but I fully agree with you that this is an area that needs to be more focused on. But then, of course, these organizations with a lot of people and IT services that have other priorities than the policy people, it's not always easy to find a common ground. But there is some movement, and it's certainly a point that we will continue to make, also from within.
Can I join in this? So I'm on Mastodon since 2016, and it's still largely unusable because it's a nerd thing, and we need to get the nerds together with the designers who are really good at designing interfaces where somebody who is technologically not really good can still have a great experience. And I think in this room, how many journalists are here? Hands up, please. So one, and she's sitting on the panel. How many, or two? Okay. So how many designers are here, or creative people, marketing people? Okay, there's a few. So I think for the next iteration of this conference, I think it would be great to have all these great technologies people together in a room also with creatives to bridge this gap. We need to get out of our silos, and this, I think, is going to help us.
I would like to continue the conversation. I think we have a question here in the front.
Thanks for excellent discussion. I'm Harvey Zoden. I used to be a vice president of ABC Television, and I worked in the Carter administration. I just want to follow up a little bit about what you were just discussing. So it seems to me we've had AI for half a century, although it was more primitive before. And yesterday we were discussing quantum, which I knew very little about, but better get up to speed on very quickly. So don't we need a whole of society approach, like Augusto talked about, like a CERN for AI, a CERN for quantum, where you have all the different multidisciplinary representatives to both advance forward and also to design the guardrails. Thank you very much for the enlightenment you've provided so far.
I would actually like to make a quick comment on that. I think what we see in the world, on one hand, in the East, you have the command economy approach, where everything is centrally planned and controlled. And in the West, you have the, well, let's leave it to the market, which essentially means to private big tech monopolies. And I would like to see a solution in Europe that is exactly what you suggested. How can we collaborate? How can we bring together all these resources in maybe not such a federated way? The federation for some things is maybe a weakness. We've been asked, for example, how can the federated AI landscape of Europe compete with OpenAI? And it's very hard, because if you want to build a big model, You have to bring all the resources to one place, not have them distributed over all the different countries. So yes, I think it's an excellent initiative. And sorry, it's not really my place to answer these questions, so I should offer, does anyone from the panel want to tackle that? Okay. I think we need to wrap up. Thank you very much again to the panelists.